Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this morning. We appreciate you being here on this Lord's Day for this extra period of Bible study, for this time we can get together and actually engage one another in discussion about God's Word, and that's always an encouraging thing during these Bible class periods. We're studying in the Psalms on this Sunday morning class, and just studying some of the selected Psalms that the author of our questions has picked out for us. I think that'd be a pretty daunting job if you were going to write a study guide on the book of Psalms, and you obviously can't cover every single one. How would you choose which ones to do? I don't know. I've never even attempted that. But today, if you're looking at the study guide, it's lesson 6, and we're going to look at two Psalms today, 57 and 142. 57 and 142. So we'll start with 57 if you want to turn there. Like almost all of the ones that we have studied up to this point, this psalm also is believed to have been written during the time that David was being pursued by Saul. And we've talked about that background every week in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and so we won't repeat all of that again. I'm satisfied that we would have a little bit of trouble relating to the kind of circumstance that David was in. Actual physical trauma, I guess the word I would use would be trauma. I mean, he's being pursued by a powerful man who definitely wants to kill him. And this powerful man, of course, is not acting alone. He's got a whole army of people at his disposal to seek and pursue David, and it would be a very tough thing. So, as we've been saying, all of us go through difficulties in life. Our difficulties are not exactly parallel to David's by any stretch of the imagination, but we still have troubles and difficulties. And the way David looked at his troubles and the way he approached them and how he dealt with them, I think is a good learning opportunity for us as we deal with hardships and difficulties in our lives. So, Psalm 57, let's read it. Psalm 57, beginning verse 1. Be merciful unto me, O God, be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpast. I will cry unto God most high, unto God that performeth all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Selah. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. My soul is among lions, and I lie down, and I lie even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have digged a pit before me, into the midst whereof they are fallen themselves. Selah. My heart is fixed, O God. My heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise. Awake up, my glory. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O God, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. For thy mercy is great unto the heavens, and thy truth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens, and let thy glory be above all the earth. All right. So the psalm starts out with David's request for mercy. Mercy is when you don't get what you deserve. I always like that, and I repeat that pretty often. I think mercy is when you don't get what you deserve, and grace is when you get what you don't deserve. I think is a pretty simple working definition of mercy and grace. So this request for mercy from David is that God would bless him, but in the extent he's not worthy, and he wants God to bestow upon him to be merciful to his faults, to not hold him guilty for things that he has done. When we pray, certainly I think that needs to be in our prayers. We need to pray for God's mercy, because we deserve to be punished. As we often say, what we have earned and what we deserve is to be sent eternally to hell. And so there's nothing worthy in us. We're not worthy of God's blessings. And David saw that. And when you beg for mercy, that indicates, I believe, an attitude of humility, which is so very critical for us all to possess. And David was asking for that. The word mercy literally suggests the idea to bend, to stoop down, to extend favor to someone in an inferior position. That would definitely be true of God's relationship with us, right? We are certainly in an inferior position to Him, and He extends favor to us. We're in an inferior position, but He stoops down. He reaches out to us who are undeserving, and that's what David was asking for. I really think some concentration on our part on the idea of humility and necessary humility is very helpful. When he in the context of that, he also expresses real confidence that God will bless him in these needed ways. And we can do that too. I mean, we're certainly unworthy, and so we need God's mercy and grace. But even at that, we can speak with confidence that God provides that. Even though we don't deserve it, even though we are completely unworthy of what He does for us, we can speak with confidence that He will provide such. And that's, I would say that's a comforting thing in the course of life's troubles, is to know and be certain that God is there and that God sees and cares and loves us and provides for us. That's really an amazing thing when you stop to consider it. Because, as I said, we're so unworthy. And our conduct and our actions, our thoughts and our words are often far from what they ought to be. And yet God still cares for us. It's an amazing thing. Notice David's expression here as he describes his enemies. Verse 4, "My soul is among lions, and I lie down even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongues a sharp sword." I was particularly taken by the expression, I lie down among them that are set on fire. Now, these are his enemies, right? He's describing his enemies. You know, sometimes when somebody gets really worked up, we talk about their hair's on fire. Well, that's the way David's enemies were. Their hair was on fire as they pursued him and sought to do him harm. You can't imagine being among lions. I talked to someone recently whose relative had been in somewhere in the southern part of Africa, maybe Zimbabwe, I'm not sure where, but they had been out preaching in areas where there were lions, and they had to camp out. They were in such a remote place they had to actually camp out, but they had to camp. The vehicle was fixed so they could pitch their tent on the top of the vehicle, because there were lions, and while they were in the tent on the top of the vehicle, they would hear the lions prowling around outside the vehicle. I can't even imagine that. But what if the lions were not literal lions? Here in David's case, these are not literal lions, but that's how he's representing the people who are pursuing him. That's how he sees his enemies. They're like lions who would tear you to pieces if they had a chance to do so. Their teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. A pretty graphic, I mean, obviously a figurative description, but a very graphic description of the kind of people that he was dealing with. These were powerful people who definitely could do harm and were intending to do so. Tom?
Lions tend to start and prey. They go out for home, they traps for them. They actually work in, pride works together to pick out the weakest to attack. So, not only is he talking about the fierceness of the lion, but also, he was the prey and they were surfacing back.
Yeah, he was the prey, and like you said, if you watch any of those documentaries, nature films and stuff, you see how the lions work together to come upon their prey, and that's what these guys were doing to get David. So, you ever feel like people are against you? You ever feel like there are enemies who would do you harm if they could? Usually the harm that we're worried about is not physical harm, and not the idea that some of our enemies might take our lives, but there are sadly instances in our lives when there are people who are against us, and given a chance to do so, they would cause harm to us in one way or another. Again, typically it's not physical harm. It's not like they would kill us, but they might do us harm. What do you do when you're in that kind of a circumstance? Well, you pray and you trust God. And that's what David was doing here. In the course of this psalm, David expresses some determination on his part to be faithful to God. He says in verse 1, "My soul trusteth in thee. In the shadow of thy wings I will make my refuge until these calamities be past." He said, I'm not giving up. He's in the course of calamity, but I'm going to see this through. So he was determined to be faithful to God throughout the course of these calamities. But then also in verse 2, I'm going to cry unto God Most High, and to God that performeth all things for me. But especially verse 7, "My heart is fixed, O God, my heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise." So, in the course of uncertainties, David had one thing that was certain for sure, and that is that he was going to stay loyal to God. My heart is fixed. I think that's an expression that maybe we could incorporate in our thinking. Certainly it's the way we ought to be. I'm not sure we accomplish that at all times, but my heart is fixed. I'm going to do what God wants me to do. I don't care what else may be going on, and I don't care who else may be trying to do harm. I'm going to be faithful to God. My heart is fixed. That's a really good disposition, isn't it? That's the way that we ought to be. Tom?
That passage there sort of reminds you of what Jesus talked about. For those Jerusalem, he said, "Be like a mother hen that gathers her chicks under her wing." And here that same picture is painted here in the Psalm, that under God's wing until the danger passes. God is that mother hen that has the desire to. And David recognized that he was chicken. If he wanted that protection, he had to go to that safe abode.
I think that's right. Exactly right. Anybody else? Any thoughts here? Here's a suggestion for us all. Try to focus on that expression that David used there. My heart is fixed. And he repeated again, "My heart is fixed, or God, my heart is fixed." I'm not going I'm not going to waver. I'm committed. I'm going to stick through. I'm going to see it to the end. He certainly has confidence that God is going to bless him. Verse 9, "I'll praise thee, O God, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. Thy mercy is great unto the heavens, thy truth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God." So he certainly has faith and confidence, a strong degree of confidence, as we said, in the midst of some really difficult circumstances that he was dealing with. Before we pass from this psalm, just as a complete, total side note, what about the psaltery and harp? Verse 8, awake up, my glory, awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. So, in the context of praising God for all his goodness and all his provision, David mentions praising him with the psaltery and harp. And the only reason I bring that up is because you know and I know that very often when we get into a discussion of using instruments of music, it will be brought up that they used them in the Old Testament. And even, I mean, there's a lot of such references in the Old Testament, but just one, so somebody throws this up to you, the psaltery and the harp. They worship God with musical instruments in the Old Testament. Why can't we do that now? How are you going to answer? Quick answer. It's true, right, Wayne?
Yeah, we live under a different set of laws. Do I live by the laws of Africa when I'm here in the U.S.? No. I live by the laws of Africa when I'm in Africa. When I'm in the Old Testament, I live by the laws of the Old Testament. Instrumental music was even commanded in one of the Psalms, I forgot which one it was, Psalm 120 maybe or something like that. But the New Testament is not. We have the law under which we live.
Exactly. I've known Christians who tried to argue that they didn't use instruments, that they did but weren't authorized to do so. And I think that's a faulty argument. They were certainly used and were authorized to use instruments of music in the Old Testament. And that's a given, that's a granted. We're not arguing that point. They did a number of other things in the Old Testament too. They offered animal sacrifices in the Old Testament, There's a number of things they did in worship of God in the Old Testament that we don't do today because, as Wayne said, we live under a different law. That should be pretty easy for us to explain. But again, I think our first point is to grant that, yes, they did use instruments. We're not arguing that. Wade, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I was kind of going to go down the same line. There was a book several years ago, I can't remember, I think maybe Gospel Advocate put it out. It was on instrumental music, and it had probably 6 or 7 different articles from brethren. And basically the argument was that they were arguing that instrumental music was not authorized in the Old Testament. Yeah. Or at least, I don't know if the whole book was, but I know at least one of them was arguing that. And I think that when we put ourselves in that position, all we do is just defeat everything, because if people feel like that you're just trying to make something out of nothing, and if you're just trying to argue, for the point of the fact that you want to do acapella music, then that's not going to work. You've got to grant whatever is truthful, in the book.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. The reaction people are going to give to you if you try to argue that is, well, I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say then. That's ridiculous. Because we read it right here, right? Yeah, exactly so. Tom?
Saul had commissioned David. David was a harp player. That when he had these troubled times to come in and, soothe his soul, and here, it's almost like David is talking to God. And as I sing praises to you, awaken this heart and things that I might, find some contentment and be relaxed and realize that I can continue going on. For his peace of mind, the way it's sort of the week, he says, awaken my Lord. And then he goes into his heart things. So he's talking about a self-benefit to him. Because prior to that, he was singing praises to God, but then here he sort of draws it to himself. So I don't know if that's, the situation that's there, sort of subcontext within the context.
So you're saying that it might be a reference to him to using the psaltery and harp to calm himself. Maybe so. I hadn't looked at it that way, but it is certainly, that's sandwiched between the end of verse 7, I will sing and give praise, and the start of verse 9, I will praise thee. So the reference to psaltery and harp is sandwiched between those two statements. So I think he's talking about using those instruments, and we know other psalms do certainly talk about using those instruments to glorify God. Okay, let's switch over to Psalm 142. Well, my pages are just stuck together. Here we go. 142. Let's read it. I cried unto the Lord with my voice unto the Lord did I make my supplication. I poured out my complaint before him. I showed before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then thou knewest my path. In the way wherein I walked have they privily laid a snare for me. I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul. I cried unto thee, O Lord. I said, thou art my refuge and my portion in the land of the living. Attend unto my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. All right. So I think contextually we're still looking at the same kind of situation that David was dealing with, and it is believed that this was also written during the time that Saul was pursuing him. He describes himself, I mean, it's pretty detailed description of how he felt very threatened. I was impressed with verse 3 where he said, my spirit was overwhelmed within me. You ever felt that way? You ever felt overwhelmed? I think we do from time to time, don't we? Again, I got to be really careful here that we don't suggest that our circumstances parallel to David's in really any way whatsoever. But I tell you, I have felt overwhelmed at times, and I'm sure that you have too. He said that he was overwhelmed. So in his reaction, what do you do when you feel such overwhelming troubles? He cried out to the Lord. So I think it's significant that he cried out to the Lord, and he's beseeching the Lord for help. But I think it's got to be significant that he wasn't blaming the Lord. Sometimes we do that, and people are prone to do that. God, why are you doing this to me? God, why are you allowing me to be hurt and troubled like I am? And we put the blame on God. God doesn't deserve it. Anytime that we are suffering, especially suffering the consequences of other people doing things to us, evil people doing things to us, wicked people, sinful people that's not God's fault. We should not be inclined to ever place the blame on God. God's not doing that. So he cried out to the Lord. He made supplication to the Lord. Maybe somebody with a newer version, I didn't check this. Verse 2, King James says, I poured out my complaint before him. What's another version say? Same word, everybody, same kind. But I think what we might be tempted to interpret is, God has not done well. I'm going to complain to God. God has not taken care of me like I think that he should. I don't think that's the complaint. His complaint is, this is probably used in the sense of a legal action. Very often in a trial or some kind of a court proceeding, they will refer to something as a complaint. And basically, that's just a description of the circumstance. When we use the word complain, it usually is describing some kind of gripe or grievance we have against the person we're complaining to. But I don't think that's the case here. I think his complaint is against those who do evil. And the very next phrase, I think, would sort of verify that. I showed before him my trouble. Tom?
Looking at that complaint is also anxiety and trouble. So he's presenting his anxiety and trouble now. Very similar to what Elijah did. When Elijah felt burdened and things, and who is there with the nation? And then God replied to him, I've set 7,000 and 7,000. He was thinking he was all alone. He was petitioning God, and God answered himself. Yeah. I think it's more of that one than the other of just, sort of blaming God for...
Yeah, I don't think he's blaming. I think you're right. Wayne?
There's a figure called the Hebrew parallelism, and I think it's being employed here in verses 1 and 2 especially. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. In other words, I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. He's saying the same thing in the words. Same thing in verse 2. I pour out my complaint before thee. I declare my trouble before him. So God is his judge, and he's complaining. He's making his complaint about others to God.
I think that's right.
He's not complaining about God.
Exactly right. I think you're exactly right. You got to. One of the things that to me sort of jumps off the page is, I showed before him my trouble. Why would God care about my troubles? I'm an unworthy worm. I'm an insignificant speck in the universe, in the order of history. I have no standing. I mean, here's the Almighty God, creator of the universe, and here I am. I'm just a nothing, and yet He cares to hear about my troubles. Sometimes I just sit and shake my head in awe that the God of heaven cares about my trouble. Why would He bother Himself with my trouble? But He does. That's an incredible thing when you stop to think about it. And so that's what David said here. He saw God as his only help. Notice he believed that these people were setting traps for him. In the way, verse 3, wherein I walked, have they privily laid a snare for me. That's literal, really, in the case of what was going on with David. I'm not saying that they had actually, dug a booby trap pit and that he would fall into it, although they may have. But they were certainly trying to entrap him or ensnare him. They were in that history of what was going on there. When we read in 1 Samuel about how Saul and his armies were pursuing David, I mean, they were operating a network of informants. They were trying to get insights as to where he was and what he was doing, so that they could ensnare him or entrap him. And so, that is, in David's case, literally true. In our case, probably not true. I mean, but people do try to entrap us. Maybe they try to catch you and twist your words, or try to make something out of nothing in regards to what you've done or said. So sometimes our enemies do sort of set a trap for us to ensnare us. So how bad did David think that it was? I looked on my right hand, and behold, there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul. Oh, wow. Again, you ever feel that way? No man cared for my soul. I mean, I was all alone in this business. That's how bad it was. And I got to say, I don't think it's justified. I don't think that we have a true basis to feel that way, because we really, if you think about it, we're surrounded by a network of people who really do care for us. But sometimes when you get down and discouraged, and when troubles seem overwhelming, and he used that word here, he was overwhelmed, verse 3, sometimes it feels like you're all alone. No man cares for you. It's not. I don't think it's the case. I seriously doubt that it was actually the case with David here. He still had family, and he had some followers who were with. He was not, out there wandering around, one man by him. He had a company of loyalists who were with him. They weren't significant in comparison to Saul's army, but sometimes you just feel like you're all alone. Wade, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I was just kind of going back to what Wayne had said in verse 1, hear my prayer, O Lord. In Psalms 4, we sing a song. We don't sing it here, but an old song called "Hear Me When I Call." Lord, hear me when I call. And just kind of what you were saying is that sometimes when we get really down and depressed, we don't feel like God is listening to us.
Yeah.
And so we keep reaching out to Him, saying, "Please, Lord, listen to me. Please hear me, Lord." And I feel like that just going through the Psalms, David says this multiple times.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think what it's expressing is our sense of dependency upon God when we call out like that.
Yeah, I mean, we do that to our family. Yeah. Listen to me. Please listen to what I'm saying to you.
Yeah. Tom?
Just that previous song was up, it talked about they dug pits for him. That was a scare thing.
Yeah.
Think about Daniel, the people that went through, they actually plotted and
Oh,
planned
yeah.
out the whole scenario because they knew what he was going to do, and they set it up so that, that
They definitely laid a trap for him.
and, we've been in the business world, things, people like that. They get jealous of your position or whatever, and so they actually lay traps for you to have something look unfavorable to you.
There's a lot of politics played in it. Yeah, Wayne?
Just 2 years ago in Africa, Steve, Chris, and I were all in Cape Coast area, but we had different plans, and so they stayed at Cape Coast, and I went off and went to different regions, Hakurani. And when I was there, I was by myself, and I felt so alone.
Yeah.
There was, you're speaking a message at that time that could have been not well received by people.
Yeah.
And yet, you didn't have anybody you could rely on, you didn't have anybody you could associate with, no companionship, you were all alone. Paul felt that way when he was at, I think, Corinth, when he sent for Timothy to come down to him. He wanted word from Timothy to see how the church was doing. Ephesus, I think, was where Timothy was at the time. But you get the feeling that way, and it really works on your emotions.
I know you said you were really stressed, and that's, I know, and you know this well. When you travel in places like that and you're with somebody else, there's a bond, a connection between you and that other person that endures. I mean, because when you're facing sort of all alone circumstance and there's one other person that stands with you, that really establishes a tight bond. David felt alone, although I said he had other loyalists who were with him, but he felt alone. No man cared. That expression, I've always been impressed with that expression. You've seen it and probably heard sermons or read bulletin articles. No man cared for my soul. I would argue, again, I'm not faulting David here. I think he's expressing his heart and expressing the depths of his stress. But in reality, for us, if we were ever to think that, I think what we need to do is certainly do what David did. He prayed about it. But then the other thing we need to do is realize it's not actually true. No man cared for my soul. I've got a whole bunch of people who care for my soul. And that's one of the great blessings that God has in his wisdom designed into the church. We are not out here on an island. We are not alone. We are surrounded by people who care for our souls, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Any additional thoughts or comments, anybody? All right. Notice he says about his enemies there at the end of verse 6. He said, attend to my cry. I'm brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. And again, in David's circumstance, that's actually definitely true. The people who were pursuing him were stronger than he was. Even though he had some people with him, the army that was pursuing him was stronger than the group of men that he had who were working with him. And so his persecutors were stronger than he is. What about us? Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Well, actually, our enemies are stronger than us, right? I mean, Satan and all of the forces at his disposal are stronger than we are. But with God's help, if God's on our side, we're stronger than them. James.
So we're pictured as being lambs, right? Being led by Jesus. To the devil is pictured in 1 Peter as being a lion that devours, right? So we don't have hope in and of ourselves. But just prior to that, God says, cast your cares on him because he cares for you.
Yeah.
Cast your anxiety on him because he cares. We've got him on our side. It doesn't matter. We're always going to be weaker than the world because the devil owns the world. But God's on our side, so we have somebody.
That's right. You've heard that meme, God plus one makes a majority. If God is on our side, we're stronger than our enemies. But I do think it's important for us to understand it. Alone, on my own, my enemies are stronger than me. I got to have that reliance on God. John?
It's important to remember that, he's our enemy. He's our primary enemy. And his focus is fully on us. He has everybody else already.
Yeah. That's something that we got to dwell on from time to time. The true faithful Christians, the true dedicated, faithful New Testament Christians are such a minuscule percentage of the world's population. Satan has all the rest of the world right where he wants them. He doesn't have to exert any energies there. And so he can focus all his energies on us. And that's kind of a scary thing. Actually, it's a very scary thing. But notice how David's approach to that: attend to God, attend to my cry. I'm brought very low, deliver me from my persecutors. They are stronger than I. But he had confidence that with God's blessing, that he would be able to succeed. He still expresses that confidence in verse 7. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. Notice that last expression, thou shalt deal bountifully with me. He had all confidence that God would hear his cry and that would bless him, even in the very heart of these troubles that he was dealing with. Wayne?
I think that's the very thing that you were saying. We need to remember that we're not alone. We have righteous people.
Yeah.
That's what David was saying in verse 7. Bring me out of I've got this prison. I'm self-imprisoned by my emotional state, verse 6.
Yeah.
Now bring me out of that prison so that I may give thanks to thy name. The righteous surround me.
Yeah. That's a good point. He mentions there, the righteous shall compass me about. He needs to kind of open up his perspective and see that he's actually truly not alone. James?
In 1 Peter 5 that I mentioned earlier, the next verse regarding the devil being a lion and trying to get us says, but resist him firm in the faith so we can overcome it with God's help, knowing that the same experiences are being accomplished by your brethren. So we know that we're not alone in this fight. And we're too weak on our own, but we're not alone. People are dealing with the same problems and they're overcoming, and we should take courage in that.
I think exactly right. Very good. Any other thoughts? We're just out of time. Clayton?
So I was thinking about, why is he even writing this down? Some of them he reads to the chief musician, so he's intending to write it to give to someone. But the ones like we're reading today, it doesn't feel that way. It's more like he's just offering a prayer, but he's writing it down. So I was thinking, that's probably something we don't ever do. We'll offer prayers, but we don't ever stop and write it down, or maybe make it a little more formal in this manner. And that's how he's coping with the situation, by doing this.
That's a really interesting observation. And I've never done that. I've never written out my prayer to God as an exercise to help myself. Good. I think that's a really good observation, Clayton. I think that may be something we need to try. Good point. All right, anything else? All right, thanks everybody. Lord willing, we'll continue next week. Let me look ahead here. Next week, we're going to deal with Psalm 7, Lord willing. Psalm 7.